So 360 Capital just closed 85 million on the first close of Poly 362, a fund that does something most Italian VC won't really touch, which is taking university research and betting that they become a company. So seed stage deep tech, 2 million first check into robotics, semiconductors, AI, and energy transition. So before we start sort of saying, okay, that's just another fund, good news, etc., let's think about the implication. So their last fund backed a company called Preligence, an AI defense startup. Safran, the French aerospace giant, bought it for 220 million. And that's a return multiple that can easily become a playbook. And I think it's probably like transitioning to that way. So today we're going to start by breaking down exactly what 360 Capital may be seeing into the Italian deep tech and why more and more often we're starting seeing corporate and specifically defense corporate showing up as LPs. And then what's next for the European VC in this specific sector. So, Nick, to you, like, what was your first reaction to this new fundraise from the guys at 360 Capital?
Well, again, good news for the market for sure. This is the second instance of their, let's say, research and university-related strategy. Poly 360 was a fund that was launched in close partnership with the Politecnico of Milan. And the original idea was to have basically, I'm not going to say captive, but strong relationship with that specific university in order to invest in the innovation coming out from there. And the Politecnico of Milan, together with Politecnico of Turin, are probably the two of the most prolific universities in terms of technology startups in Italy right now. And that strategy must have paid off. If you know the second installment of this fund is probably twice as big directionally. I think just throwing out a rough estimate, and with super interesting investors, I would say, from the list. So very nice opportunity for deep tech founders.
Absolutely, and as you say, the Politecnico is really ranking up in the different world ranking. I think it became, I think, last year within the top 100 best university in the world for a certain ranking. So that's a great news. Italy has always had a history of a world class researcher, but the problem was the next part, which is the commercialization infrastructure that we keep seeing in the past years, and it's always the same problem, unfortunately. But I agree with you. Deep tech, great signal. Maybe that's kind of the turning point right now. And just to pull up some data, in 2023, deep tech accounted for 44% of VC funding in Europe. 44%.
Yeah.
So a huge chunk. Started back in 2023, but definitely like is growing. And all research connected to it is probably like a very, very prolific and with a huge upside potential, I would say.
Yeah, and if you include in the scheme of all of this, if you remember the Tech European Foundation, that team up between the Politecnico of Milan and the Bocconi University, where they both basically moved the incubation and acceleration platforms into a unique foundation with the goal to invest and host hundreds of startups in a new location in the outskirts of Milan. So this is a big opportunity for Poly 360 to get to very high quality deal flow and for international investors to find a specific strong pool in Italy where deep tech startups happen. Yep. So there is a trend here, and I think we are doing well in trying to work on that.
And on top of that, I think, in terms of deep tech is really becoming institutionally digestible in a way. So the European Fund, CDP, it's very interesting because it's more and more common to invest in this kind of sector. And besides that, also the participation of corporations like Brembo, for example, like Braking Company, one of the biggest in Italy, and especially MBDA. to these kind of deals. That's very interesting. I mean, we always talk about how corporate are sort of keeping a foot into the startup ecosystem of some form, early or late, to kind of get an edge. And here is a great way to build a pipeline even before the pipeline is created. So especially for MBDA, which is one of the top European missile technology provider. So let's just say it out loud, especially now that we talk about dual technology. That's their
exactly.
angle. Yeah,
There's a lot of hinting at dual use applications here. So but it's perfectly on trend.
It is on trend, and it's the right of they're paying the right of first look, which I mean it's smart on paper for companies. Not many people actively do that, and especially for sensitive. I mean, companies that have they need a sensitive edge on very sensitive technology. That's even more and more a priority. So definitely an interesting frame, not new, but definitely well executed, I would say. So one thing that also I'm kind of looking into this news before we pass to the other news is the fact that talking about fund structure, maybe it seems that Europe is going toward like a bifurcated path. So one is VC fund that traditionally follow the sort of the US outlook of investing in digital software and sort of more of broad scape thesis. And then on the other side, you have also the thesis-driven vehicles, which are backed by a coalition of state, corporates, and maybe policy mandates as well. So there is a sense where certain VC firms are actually taking at heart of their investment thesis some form of like sort of policy, European policy flavors. So I don't know what's your take on that, but I see that this is where it's going in some sense in Europe, which is not really what we might see in the US. So maybe there is a bifurcation there. Maybe it's the beginning of a bifurcation, and so yeah, that's maybe where we're gonna see the VC industry going for Europe.
No, that's interesting. So I don't know. I have a joke in mind that VC in the US try to lobby the government to go in that direction, and we see in Europe follow the legislation and invest according to what the EU is planning. So I don't know. This is a joke.
Spot on. Spot on.
The second joke, and something that I find myself discussing a lot, is about what's on the menu for upcoming regulation in EU, because there are investment opportunities. Just follow the regulation. And it has been true in the last few years. I mean, the GDPR, the cookie law, the AI Act, they were all, hindrances for companies for sure, but big investment opportunities for new technology companies coming up and wanting to ride the wave of the new regulation coming up. So pros and cons there. But basically, the EU is creating markets here.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And also corporates becoming more and more sensitive, despite the fact that, there is a lot of noise, corporate venture units closing, some are opening, some are closing, it's cyclical. But fact is that, for example, 360 Capital counts corporate for roughly 30% of their LP base. So 30% of capital comes from corporate. Think about that. It's a good example, a strong example with some successful cases. And also that's I would say a solid trend at some point.
Yeah. I mean, you use the keyword here, trend. We all hope so, right? So more connection between the corporate world and the investment world.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, but still, so we need the type of involvement.
Totally. All right, going back to the funding, the startup funding of last week. Actually, thanks to this funding, we're kind of reaching the 2024 and 23 levels according to your tracking device, which I always encourage people to consult. So it's not bad. It's like we're getting close to that level in a certain sense. There is still missing like a tiny bit, but it's an interesting trend for sure. So starting from Trifoglio, startup operating in the car wash space, raising 30 million in a round from different investors, including Luca Pretto and Paolo Fregati. So looks more like of a private equity / scaling playbook kind of deal. So these guys are basically trying to scale as quick as possible Carwash under a very recognizable brand. And they've been basically doing already something like that in other fields. So they're kind of rinsing and reusing the same playbook, which is a successful playbook. If you find the right market with the right direction and you integrate, then it's one of the solid way to grow. So they have a pipeline of about 30 plus acquisition and the ambition to build a 150 site national network within the next 5 years. So yeah, not your classic startup, I would say, but definitely an interesting business playbook.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I wasn't sure about adding that as a startup, but I mean, uh, it's borders are somehow getting blurred in what's a startup, what's not a startup. I mean, in many spaces outside of deep tech, the venture capital playbook has been applied quite a lot. And the private equity playbook is coming down to venture-based startups. So aggregations are becoming more common. So these plays are, becoming not unseen. We have at least one portfolio company where the entire strategy is that aggregation playbook. So we can argue there is little new technology innovation here. So there is no particularly innovative tech. There's a lot of process, a lot of optimization, a lot of marketing playbook, but still, they're trying to do something disruptive in terms of growth and speed.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about Subbyx, consumer electronic as a service platform, raising 30 million in a Series A round from Systemic Capital, Azimuth, and Flashpoint. So in general, Subbyx basically allows merchants and enterprise to convert traditional sales into subscription-based revenue streams. And basically the platform allows to manage the full life cycle of subscriptions, so a very kind of new way of thinking about product and how we use and we will use product. We talked about Subbyx before, especially when they raised, I think, one of their first round. The common pattern here that we can maybe notice is the fact that there is not only equity investment, but also debt investment. So again, the pattern that we've been seeing repeating over and over, especially in bigger round, like a 30 million Series A or even bigger, where you always have some form of debt financing, in this case by Flashpoint. So again, this kind of cycle repeating in a certain degree.
Yeah, I agree with you, but again, this is probably a feature, not a bug in the specific model. In this case, I would say at least. So usually debt is thrown upon by investors because debt is seen as some kind of waste that will slow down growth from a certain point on. But I would argue that Subbyx is a balance sheet heavy playbook, and you don't want to finance the balance sheet part of your playbook with equity. That's too expensive. You want to use it on the go-to-market part of the strategy and use much cheaper debt in order to get the flywheel for the balance sheet. Because remember, it's a renting service. Someone has to own the assets. So as long as they are the owners of the assets, they need to load up the balance sheet. So that makes full sense from a strategic point of view. Even though usually VCs do not love debt in their portfolio companies.
Awesome. No, so true. Absolutely. So let's finish with Dronus, startup developing industrial drones, raising 15 million. So it was a good week overall. And that's a growth round from Algebris, Azimuth, and CDP Venture. So also with the participation of Any Next. So in general, the company develops drone-in-a-box systems, basically automating takeoff, landing, charging, and remote fleet management for different applications, including inspection, monitoring, security, smart city. So drone technology, started as kind of a a fun thing to do in different sort of less useful space, and is really turning heavily into some of the most useful applications. So it's not just having fun, it's really, security monitoring, building inspection. There is a lot of companies working in very real and concrete applications. So definitely good news on this side.
Yeah. Here we have an example, finally, of more deep tech projects. So there's hardware, there's design, there's research. So good to know that there's also this angle this week.
Awesome. All right, on a final note, please people check out Nick's participation to Unicorni podcast. It's in Italian, but it's very interesting because it gives a good sense of what's happening in the overall in the Italian ecosystem. So definitely check it out. And of course, with having said that, thank you, Nick, for this week, and I'll see you next week.
Jack, thank you so much. See you in a week. Ciao, everybody. Take care. Happy Easter.